All right, we are live. Welcome back to Dominating Your Investments. Dom Rinaldi here. Got my sidekick, Kris Patel. We're going to try to do this again for the second time for a live stream. Hopefully, fingers crossed, no video or audio issues. So we'll see what we got here. Good
Yep,
evening,
sounds
Kris.
good.
I wanted to start just talking about some different stocks, and we all know that growth has just gotten crushed the last couple weeks, and we titled this as dominating um, bag holders, right? To uh, what it means to be a bag holder and a long term investor, and how do you do that successfully when all this volatility is happening and drama? Uh, and we kind of started hitting on it last night about making sure your thesis is still intact, right? Making
Yeah.
sure that the company really hasn't changed. And I thought we could just start with one that we got a lot of questions about on the YouTube channel about Abcellera, which we're both shareholders and passionate about.
Mhm.
It's trading now. I'm looking at it, $8.46. It is a profitable company. I'm sorry, 8.64. It keeps fluctuating.
Yeah.
Uh, so it's a profitable company, but it has taken a huge hit, right? So when we made the videos and interview about a couple months ago, it was trading around $13, $14. And now we're down to 864. And when it actually had the first approval on their first monoclonal drug for COVID, it was all the way up at $46, right? So we're from 46 to 864. So maybe you can just shed some light on your thesis on it, but also why it's dropped and why you're not too worried.
So I think you have to start off by when did they go public? They went public around the time where COVID was starting to become, well, it had already ravaged through the country and everything. And they were one of the first companies to develop a monoclonal that was effective against the original variant of COVID. So a lot of people had high expectations for it. But what a lot of people missed, especially that are missing now, is that it's not a COVID stock. And if you look at a lot of companies that have primarily really done really well because of COVID, they've all gotten beat up, right? The thing is, they understood, and with Peter Thiel being on the board, that if we're going to have a revolutionary company, right, which is still very early in its development cycle, they should go public when the market is really hot for it, right? So when they went public, everyone was interested in COVID stocks. They were able to generate a ton of buzz around it, and it's a kind of the same thing that he kind of did during the PayPal years, right? Where
Hmm.
early on they understood that PayPal was going to be something big, but at the same time they're like, okay, we need to get as much money as we can done, right? So this way we have a giant war chest that we can use to kind of build our business in the future. Right now, outside of the couple of COVID products that Abcellera has, like partnerships with Eli Lilly, they don't have very much.
Right.
They've got partnerships with a ton of companies that they're doing research on, but those are still very early in their development cycle. Now, that doesn't mean that Abcellera is worthless? It just means that the value is going to be presented at a much longer time frame than people were originally assuming. A lot of analysts, when they came on and they were evaluating Abcellera for what the worth could be, they took into account a lot of revenues that were going to be present for because of COVID. And I think one of the things that I think a lot of people underestimated was just how fast we would recover from COVID in terms of like, developing other drugs that can help combat it. So an example is, and this is where I think Abcellera had that inflection point where they started to really go down, and that was when not Moderna, when Pfizer and Merck started talking about oral antiviral pills to kind of combat COVID. And we kind of know what happened. Merck, their drug is really murky. There's a whole bunch of side effects around it, and it's only 30% effective. So, originally I remember when Abcellera kind of took a hit and Merck just shot up. It was like, oh, we found a pill that can help with COVID, and it was like, okay, but what's the side effects? What are some of the other things around it? And it's and then later on, they actually came back and said, well, you know what, it's not as effective as we originally thought. It's only 30% effective. And by that time, Pfizer had come up with another pill, and that one is actually effective. And it works. And it's got a decently high effective rate. The problem with the Pfizer one is that it does interfere on how replication happens. But so if you're on other medications, actually Paxlovid, which is what Pfizer has, may not be what's suitable for you. So I think what it is there are still challenges around using it everywhere, um, but essentially it is effective. So at this point, who would have guessed that now Omicron comes around? So in December, we started to see Omicron become, like the biggest thing ever. So now, Bamlimonab, which was their original product, was not effective against it. So that's
Still
where it's
impressed
like,
that you can actually say that properly. I just call it BAMV because it's
yeah,
too hard to say.
it's been a lot of practice.
Yeah.
So what was good at is that last year they actually had another drug that they were working on, which was actually effective against a lot of other types of variants, and it's actually effective against the Omicron variant, which right
That's
now
the
they have.
1404 testing.
Yeah,
Yeah.
1404. They Eli Lilly, I think last month kind of came out and said, yeah, we're doing an EUA for it. So an emergency use authorization that's probably going to be sped along. It's a monoclonal, but the big difference between this one versus the old monoclonals, especially the ones from Regeneron and the old Bamlimonab, that was very highly utilized, is that it doesn't require like a huge a huge infusion, right? So
Yeah.
now, right now, you need to get an IV in you. You need like 30 minutes
Yeah,
to an
that's
hour
that's
of
that's not
infusion.
ideal, right? Like, no one wants
No,
to go and
no,
get an IV and deal with that. They just
yeah,
wanna take the medicine and move on.
right.
Would
So
you well, let me ask you this, would you label this as a COVID stock, or are they much more than this
I
when you look
think
at this company?
I think in the short term they're a COVID stock because they're generating all of their revenue 95% of their revenue from COVID, right? Which is their partnership with Eli Lilly selling BAM. That's where they're still generating majority of their revenue. Bebtilmonab, which is 1404, hopefully is due any day now. Once that emergency use authorization comes in, we should start to see another year of nice revenues come from that also. So that'll kind of like help push the price, and I think put a good floor under Abcellera for now. But I think the growth, especially the inflection growth, we're probably gonna have to wait until maybe 2024, maybe 2025 to really see all those other drugs that they have in the pipeline start to kind of show up. And you'll see them, they'll be in clinical trials and they'll be in all sorts of different phases. But you have to remember, Abcellera is building itself up to be a huge company, not today, not tomorrow, but in the future, right?
Yeah.
They came public at a time where it was the most beneficial for them so that they could raise capital. And that's what you need. Businesses need to raise capital so that they can build upon it, right? So
Yeah.
that's why they went public. And I think right now a lot of the analysts, they had really high expectations for it. They gave them really, really like high up their price targets. And they haven't changed, which kind of surprises me. Like I would have thought at least some of them would have come out and said, you know what, we originally thought that this company was going to be at $55, but now we're thinking that it's going to be like 20. Not a single one of them has lowered their guidance. They're all like, yeah, we still
So,
believe
well,
in.
I just pulled up tip ranks and it's a little lower, but not by much,
Mhm.
to your point.
Yeah,
So it looks like the highest price target, which we were used to seeing this in the 40s, is $48. The average price target is 33, and the lowest is 25. But when you look at that compared to, say, a similar company, which I also hold shares in, SEMA4, that's got
mhm,
obliterated, uh, analysts have kept their target, like you said, very high,
right,
and they like the business model, right? This is
yeah,
essentially a software company in essence, because what their software is doing is helping drug companies distinguish these specific antibodies to create drugs and
yeah,
reduce the failure rate. uh, you talk about the lumpiness of the revenues, right? And how kind of 2025 it's a long-term vision. We're going to see this expand. Can you share with our audience, just with investing in biotech, or I won't say biotech's a wide word, right? A wide description. We'll
Yeah.
say investing in companies like Abcellera, what do you have to be prepared for with their kind of revenues, and how that works? Because it's not consistent. It's not something that constantly keeps reoccurring until you get a couple of those drugs to market.
Yeah. I think for the most part, if anyone invests in pharmaceuticals, you guys know it's a feast and a famine, right? If you have a good drug and it goes through approvals and it gets to market, it can really, 10x a company overnight. And the exact opposite can happen, where you kind of can lose your entire investment overnight as well because of failures in the drug. I think the key differentiator and the reason why I like Abcellera is that, like you said, it's a technology company, right?
Yeah, the
In
software
that,
company.
and it's, well, yeah. So it's a software slash technology company
Yeah,
in that they provide services to other pharmaceutical companies who have a base idea of what they want, and they want to partner and do the research. Where Abcellera does a lot of the research, because Abcellera was founded by a bunch of professors. They have done drug discovery and they do research, and they figured, well, you know what? Now with AI, ML, and a lot of other things coming down, how can we integrate that into medicine? And how can we integrate that into drug discovery, which is the most important thing? And if you look at the CEO, dynamic CEO, knows what he's talking about, and now they're kind of working with a lot of pharmaceutical companies. Um, Here's what I think. I think right now we're going to see some lumpiness, primarily because of COVID. A lot of the revenues that are going to be coming to Abcellera, the reason they're coming is because of how COVID is. I don't know. Maybe next month we get another variant that's affect
let's hope
that's
not.
let's hope not. Let's hope not. But let's say there happens to
Yeah,
come up one, right? And Abcellera has the only drug that's that's effective against it. Overnight, the stock will
yeah.
shoot up to like 200,
That's
right? So what I think is going to happen is, in the short term, I think people are going to have to just temper the expectations, just constantly DCA in.
yeah,
After 2025, what's going to happen is, once you start getting multiple revenue sources from multiple companies sharing their revenue with you, that's when you're going to see, like, when you have one customer giving you 25 million a year, your revenue could be lumpy, because if sales don't materialize, you kind of you don't get that revenue. When you have five and you're getting, let's say, 25, 25, 25, right? That means that now, even if, let's say, one quarter this company didn't work out, you're still at 100 million. If you have 100 companies that you're partnership, and you have 100 different drugs and they're each paying 25 million, that's 2.5 billion. And out of those, maybe some don't work out. But what ends up happening is, the more you scale up, the more consistent your revenue becomes and the less lumpy it becomes. And that's the key that I think a lot of people want to get into the pharmaceutical space. And that's what a lot of ETFs do, that where they'll buy a lot of research, a lot of companies that are very early in their development cycle, and they'll buy an ETF because that's the least riskiest way to
right.
play biotech, research biotech. Because if one or two go bankrupt, they won't bring the entire sector
Portfolio
down.
down, yeah.
Yeah.
So
So
let's like jump into their presentation. Fingers crossed this doesn't crash the live stream here.
mhm.
But there is some let me pull this up here and share my screen. We'll see if I can do it. We might not be able to, but we'll see with this free version of can you see my screen yet?
No, I can't.
No, okay. Let's see if we can get this pulled up. If not, no worries.
Yeah.
Tell you what, we'll prepare for next time to have that, but I'll read off
Sure.
what the partnerships are. So they got, we already talked about Eli Lilly. They got Glasgow, Klein, GSK, very popular. Also, too, they have investments from DARPA, right? Just that,
Right.
I really, that that really jumped out at me, because Palantir had investments from DARPA, right? DARPA is the defense.
I don't know if Palantir had investments from DARPA. They've had partnership with the CIA.
No, so
DARPA
they
does.
actually
Yeah.
did. They
Really?
actually, yeah. So if you look at the way back beginning history, DARPA also invested in them,
Hmm.
and so that's an organization that always invests in the most innovative technologies,
Yeah.
right?
Hmm.
Uh, for our government, for our protection. So that always can give you a little bit of confidence. But you look at here, Merck, you look at Pfizer, you look at Novartis, Denali, the Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation, Regeneron. Like you said earlier, they struck up a partnership with Moderna, and so they have the partnerships. I think what the other part that you hit on that's so unique is their their different revenue streams and how they capture revenue. Do you want to talk about some of the different ways that they actually recognize revenue? Because it's not just
Yeah.
if they help a drug get discovered.
So the way that I would put this out is that it's almost like a sports agent, right? Where the sports agents, they get early in the lives of like an athlete, and you're not going to just rely on one athlete to kind of pay the bills. You're going to go after a whole bunch of athletes. You're going to talk to them. You're going to get them involved. You're going to be their manager. You're going to help them through the process. But what ends up happening is you get a small percentage of their total earnings, right? Now, here's the thing: the hardest part is that initial part to get that partnership done with that NBA player or football player or whoever. But then once they start making money, you start making money and you do really well because now you're not investing a whole bunch of other things into it. You're not building out infrastructure you're not buying the guy a house. You're not like buying him a car. Literally, you're just sharing in all the benefit. And I think that's the key right there that, you want to cast a really wide net. But what's important is, and the companies that you read out are big time companies. So if there was some technology gaps, where this was like vaporware or like a Theranos situation, you wouldn't see nearly the amount of adoption from the big pharmaceuticals that you've seen, right? And that's the thing. Someone would have called bullshit on it and said,
Yeah,
no, this is just some BS that they're talking about. Also, they have BAM. That was an effective product. So you can
yeah,
see that
very
they're not
quickly.
just, yeah, very, very quickly within a very short period of time. So you know that they have an effective product and effective platform to do the research. And like I said, I think at this point, they're just working on getting as many players into their ecosystem as
Yeah,
possible. And they have what I think the total count the last time I saw was almost 155 different molecules that they're targeting right now
in the pipeline. Yeah,
in
yeah. So they've
pipeline.
grown
Yep.
that consistently quarter over quarter.
Yep.
And that's something that I'm tracking, and I'm sure you are too. As far as
Yeah.
how do you measure this as a success when you have a company that's very lumpy in revenues? You can't see reoccurring revenues just straight over. Um, and their pipeline has grown every single quarter. They said, measure us by that, right? Measure
Yeah.
us by our growth and our also our partnerships,
Yeah.
and measure us on our clinical trials. I believe they went from 1 to now 5.
Yeah.
And let's maybe even take some questions here that I see on the screen. Of first one from Daniel is, does Peter Thiel have an investment in ABCL? Yes. So
Yeah.
he actually owns 4% of the company. He also is on the board of directors. And so you can see kind of his fingerprints on the company when you look at the flywheel approach, as Kris was talking about. Go
So
ahead.
so I've got some information that isn't really public out there, but it's not something that's like not really, like insider trading. One of the things is Dr. Henson, who's the CEO, is a firm believer in Peter Thiel. Like
Yes. Oh,
literally
yeah.
is one of those guys that's just like he really believes in the 0 to 1 investment philosophy. So I don't know if anyone didn't know that, but I've spoken to some people who have spoken, to them, and yeah, and like I said, I think Dr. Henson really wanted Peter Thiel to be on board, and actually work on this, and that's how I think a lot of the business model was probably developed using Peter Thiel's philosophy. So I
Agreed.
just wanted to put that out
Yes, it's very unique, and he said that publicly in some interviews. Uh, so if they work with a smaller drug company, and let's say they can't afford to work with Abcellera, Abcellera will offer to take shares in that company
there.
if they're public and have an ownership stake, or they'll have a royalty which is normally their most common way of revenue is the royalty streams.
Yeah.
And so they have this whole flywheel approach, and they also have it as you talked about earlier. You can either uh, just use the software Celium, which is their AI stacked software, to do your own kind of drug discovery if you feel you have it under control, or you could have their partnership and their research and their team help you with that for that drug discovery. What's another thing that's really interesting? I'm looking here at the Simply Wall Street breakdown of ownership. Individual insider ownership, 28%. Okay, so
Mm-hmm.
that should breed confidence that hey, if this ship sinks, then they're going down with it, right?
If you're tracking this, you can also see there's been a tremendous amount of insider buying the last quarter as well. So I don't know if that means much to a lot of you guys, but think about it this way. When you have the CEO buying back his own shares, he's like, man, this is great. Your CFO, your COO buying back shares. And this is literally a year after the IPO. So
Yeah.
what does that tell you? They're like, hey, this company's been undervalued, and they know it. They see if you who's who's the biggest bull of a company? It's your own CEO because they have the most information about it. If a CEO is buying shares in their own company, that's super bullish to me. You know.
Yeah. No, very much so. And the other piece that's really interesting, I mean, the market cap was only at 4 billion when we first started talking about this company. It's
Yeah.
down to 2.4 billion, and institutional ownership is almost 35%.
Yeah.
There's not many companies at a $2.4 billion market cap that has a third of its holdings in institutional holdings. The TAM for ABCL, Michael asked, what is it? They say on their investor presentation for antibody specific drug discovery is $140 billion TAM. So
Yeah.
you can see that on their investor presentation. And so I think another question was, does ABCL compete with Ginkgo Bioworks? So Ginkgo is a synthetic biology company. So I would say no, but I don't follow Ginkgo extremely closely. But what ABCL is doing is really more around antibody
Yeah.
therapies and not trying to create synthetic materials or anything like that.
Yeah.
But I do know that Ginkgo's software is very powerful, and that's another one to watch as synthetic biology grows.
Yeah, yeah. There's another company that I know that has a very similar research model to Abcellera. And if you're ever interested, the sector that this is trying to disrupt is something called CROs, contracted research organizations, right? Contract research organizations, they do exactly what it sounds like. They contract to research for you. So if you have an idea, you hire them, they'll do the research, give you the data, and you pay them. This one's a little different. This one is like we're a CRO where you contract us, but we're going to become partners because we know we're that good that you're going to give us a piece of the total revenue that you end up getting. So we're not just risking not getting paid. We're risking a lot more. So when you have that kind of partner, a lot of pharmaceutical companies they don't mind giving up a little bit to get a lot. And I think what it is it just shows confidence in management to say that yeah, we have a product, we know it's effective, and we're gonna forego that upfront money that we could get for doing the research, but instead we're gonna wait till we get a crap ton more money in the future. Now, there's one thing I really, really want to highlight that I really like about this company right now. One, they're not diluting shareholders at
No,
all because they've got almost $800 million in the bank right now. They barely spend
you took
30,
you took my
40.
high point. You
Yeah,
took what I was going
sorry.
to talk about. Yes,
Yeah,
no debt on the
yeah,
books.
yeah. And they're literally right now, they're still, I don't want to say a small operation, but they're really still small. They're not spending more than 30 to 40
They're not
million
burning through
dollars
a
a
lot of cash.
quarter.
Correct.
They're not burning at all. They're still generating money because even as a CRO, they're still getting a little bit of money using milestones, research like research grants. One of the grants that they've got was the Canadian government.
Hmm.
Canadian government gave them money to set up a research facility in Canada. And so that's the other thing too. I think after 2024, that's when a lot of things are going to be ramping up because they're starting to also move into like a little bit of further into how do I say this without sounding too scientific so people understand? Um, they're not trying to essentially just be software. They're trying to be very more involved with the research, but then
Right.
literally come up with a product that they can just ship directly to the pharmaceutical company, and the pharmaceutical company doesn't have to do very much. They can like right away distribute it and start doing clinical trials, and that's manufacturing, right? So half of research is researching something that's effective. The other half is figuring out a way to mass produce it, because if you can't mass produce it, nothing, it's not worth it, right? So that's the part that's kind of like oncoming that we should start to see in 2024, where not only will they do the research portion for you, but they'll also do the research around how to properly manufacture it and then hand that off to the pharmaceutical companies so that they can capitalize and and basically like mass produce it. Yeah.
Yep. Yep. So we'll wrap up Abcellera really quick. There's some questions I want to get to that were answered, just so we make sure we answer those, and then we'll jump topics here. So we have Abe saying hard time understanding what this company's focus is. So I'll try to sum it up quickly, and you can add some color to it, Kris, if there's anything I miss. So this company is solving the problem for antibody monoclonal drug discovery of 90% of drugs fail through the drug discovery process. Okay. So 90% of drugs fail. The process for the time length to take a drug from conception to product is at least typically 10 years. Okay. So I think we'll see that time shrink as technology continues to advance. We've seen that through COVID, but they have a higher success rate, which they already have shown with BAMV, which was their first drug that was created. They were able to turn that around within a 90-day time frame, and they can either basically sell their software usage, Celium, which is their AI stacked software to help discover these antibodies for new drug discovery, or they can help you through that research process and help you through the discovery process as a service. What sets them apart is they bought a company called Triani, who create these genetically modified mice that basically allow you to replicate the human genome and antibody scope of a human all at once, right? And you can see all the antibodies, and then you can penetrate and look at the different combinations of what's highly going to give you the most success to create a drug, right? Based on what kind of outcome you're trying to get and what kind of drug, what antibodies are needed. It's very hard to do. So if you can do it faster, more affordable, and a higher success rate, you have now disrupted a traditional drug discovery model in business. Kris, anything you'd add to that?
Yeah, I would say look at this company from the lens of a pharmaceutical company, right? So and I'll say exactly why. Let's say you're the CEO of a pharmaceutical company. One of your scientists comes to you and says, "Hey, listen, I have an idea that this one drug, it could be effective against plaque psoriasis." So you as the CEO say to yourself, "Okay, what am I gonna have to do to get this scientist in front of the right people and do all the right research and to get this drug, it could be effective, it could be not." So first I have to support the scientist. I have to give him some money so that he can go buy, equipment. He has to hire a team. He has to then get a whole bunch of other things together. He has to license out some of the research machines that are required in order to do it. You have to build out an infrastructure around this idea. All of that costs money, and it takes a lot of time. It takes effort. 2 years down the line, this researcher says, "Hey, listen, this product, I had an idea, and that idea doesn't work. It's not effective. What are you going to do now?" Well, guess what? You have all this stuff that you bought, that you licensed, that you hired all these people, you know, it's all lost, right? Now, imagine instead you go back and you say, okay, you know what? That same scientist comes to you and says, hey, I have an idea of this plaque psoriasis. I think this drug could be effective against it, this specific monoclonal. I've seen it in blood samples with some people and who've had it and they've been able to get better. What are we going to, what are we going to do? So the pharmaceutical, now the CEO says, you know what? I have an idea. There's a company that does specialization in research. They already have the infrastructure. They already have the scientists. They have all the licensing required to do the research. You're going to go call them. You're going to work with them. You're going to tell them your idea. They're going to sign an NDA so they can't steal it from you. And they're going to take a small piece of it. But guess what? You're going to work hand in hand with those people. They're PhDs, they're researchers, they're scientists. They have software and they have everything ready for you to do your research. Go work with them. You know what that costs the CEO? A phone call. That's it.
Yep.
That's the value proposition.
See, that's why you could explain it a lot easier.
Yeah.
I wanted you to put some color there. So we
Yeah.
like the company. Michael said, "Hey, this is interesting. I'm gonna have to do some more DD on it. They're profitable. Yes, that's a big call out. They do have cash. The PE is only 12. So yes, it's a very interesting company, and we always encourage people to do your own homework, earn your own conviction. We're not going to tell you to buy, sell a stock, but we just want to provide information that will help you do that DD. Last question on it. Someone said that the Palantir CFO, Sankar, Shyam Sankar, is on Ginkgo's board of directors, which is true. And Peter Thiel is on the board of directors for Abcl. Do you think they're using Foundry? I've hypothesized that, but there's no living proof of either on that yet. So
I think they share a business model, but
yeah,
I don't think they share
yeah,
actual software. I think they're two different pieces of software. They could have some backbone and some help integrating things, but I don't think so. As
yeah,
of right now, nothing leads me to believe that they're working hand in hand to use Foundry.
yeah.